Hello Flight Simmers and welcome back to Alpha Hotel Flight Simulator Training. This video is part 3 in a 3-video series covering the IFR cross-country training required to complete an instrument rating in the US. The IFR cross-country training flight is where all the skills you've learned during your instrument training come together and where you can demonstrate how they'll be used in practical day-to-day IFR flying. During the course of these videos, we're conducting a 3-leg IFR cross-country itinerary, and this video will focus on planning and flying the third and final leg of that itinerary in the G1000 equipped Cessna 172, and focusing on using GPS navigation. As always, if you enjoy the content, please be sure to like the video, share with your friends, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell to be alerted to new content. Before watching this video, it's a good idea to be familiar with the basics of instrument flying, the basics of instrument departures, the basics of en route IFR flying and reading en route charts, and the basics of using instrument arrivals. Additionally, you should also be familiar with the basics of flying instrument approaches. Specifically, we'll be flying an LPV type RNAV GPS approach at the termination of this flight, so it's a good idea to understand how RNAV GPS approaches are designed and flown and how to fly an LPV type RNAV GPS approach. We'll also be utilizing GPS navigation to fly the en route, arrival, and approach portions of this flight. Again, I'll be demonstrating the flight in the G1000 equipped Cessna 172, but you could also fly it in the Cessna 172 Classic or Analog panel, which is equipped with a Garmin GNS 530 and 430. Whichever aircraft you choose for this flight, make sure you're familiar with how to use its respective GPS receiver. I have a video series on each of these receivers that you can watch if you're not already familiar with the units. I'll leave links to all these videos, plus a link to the entire instrument flying playlist in this video's description. In video 1 of this series, we looked at the requirements for IFR cross-country training and then did a broad overview of the 3-leg itinerary we'd fly to complete these requirements. The itinerary takes us from Addison, Texas in the Dallas-Fort Worth area to Texarkana, Arkansas, to Mena, Arkansas, back to Addison. We then planned and flew the first leg from Addison to Texarkana. We concentrated on flying using ground-based procedures on that leg, utilizing a ground-based standard instrument departure out of Addison and flying a localizer back course approach and a VOR approach in Texarkana. The link to that video is in this video's description if you'd like to check it out. In video 2, we planned and flew a flight from Texarkana, Arkansas to Mena, Arkansas. This leg was a bit of a hybrid leg, using both ground-based nav aids and GPS navigation for both the en route portion and the approach. We concluded the flight by using the GPS to get established on the ILS approach into Mena, and then flying the approach with ground-based nav aids. The link to that video is also in this video's description if you'd like to check that out. In this video, we'll plan and fly a leg from Mena Intermountain Airport in Mena, Arkansas. The identifier on that airport is Kilo Mike Echo Zulu, back to Addison, Texas in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. The identifier on that airport is Kilo Alpha Delta Sierra. On this leg, we'll focus on using solely GPS navigation, using it to navigate the en route, arrival, and approach phases of the flight. Our filed route on this flight will be Mena Airport direct to Camel Waypoint to join the Camel transition onto the Slant 3 RNAV GPS arrival into Addison. After taking off from Mena, we'll plan to navigate using the GPS direct to Camel Waypoint, which is the first fix on the Camel transition onto the Slant 3 arrival, though if we're lucky, maybe ATC will give us direct to a waypoint further down the arrival. We'll file for an altitude of 6,000 for this westbound route, which will keep us above the off-route obstruction clearance altitudes until we get on the arrival, and then keep us above the minimum obstacle clearance altitudes on the arrival. The flight is roughly 179 track miles long as we have it filed right now, and it should take us about an hour and 45 minutes to fly it in the Cessna 172, but again, hopefully we'll be able to get a shortcut that will shave off some of that time. Once we're done flying the arrival, we'll plan to fly the LPV RNAV GPS approach to runway 16 at Addison, and we'll brief the approach en route. Since MENA is located in an area of high and rapidly rising terrain, we'll need to read our departure procedures very carefully and adhere to them very closely to avoid any close encounters with terrain. The current weather report at MENA is pretty much the same as when we arrived in the last video. They're reporting calm winds, 1.5 statute mile visibility, ceiling overcast 500, temperature 22, dew point 22, altimeter 2992. We'll plan to depart runway 27 at MENA. As you might expect, when we look up the departure procedures for MENA, there's a lot of information. There are many takeoff obstacle notes to read through. There are also non-standard takeoff minimums for most of the runways, including runway 27. It states that you need a minimum climb gradient of 425 feet per nautical mile up to 2,100 feet to use the standard takeoff minimums. While we're not bound by this as non-commercial operators, it does indicate that there is terrain out there that you might not be able to clear if you're climbing at a lower gradient and would need to see and avoid, so it's best to adhere to it. Luckily, in the Cessna 172, we can meet that climb gradient. We'll need a climb rate of about 460 feet per minute in the 172 at a normal climb at VY to meet that gradient, and we can easily do that. There's also an obstacle departure procedure for runway 27 that says you need to climb on a heading of 269, which is basically runway heading, to 2,000 feet before you make any left turns. Since our first turn is actually going to be to the right to get to Camel, this doesn't apply to us. But we can just use the standard first departure procedure of climbing on runway heading to 400 feet AGL, which is about 1,480 feet on our altimeter, before we make that right turn on course. But remember that if you are asked to make any left turns before you reach 2,000, anything left of 269, you might be compromising your obstacle clearance. It's also not a bad idea to take a look at a VFR chart for an airport with high terrain in the area where you're going to depart under instrument conditions, as it shows you where the terrain is and where most of the prominent obstacles are. So we're looking at our VFR sectional chart here. This is MENA Intermountain Airport here. You can see the field elevation is 1080, so that's where the altitude our altimeter will read when we're on the runway. And you can see going straight out here, there are a few obstacles on the departure path, one at 1640 on our altimeter there, so about 600 feet roughly above the airport elevation, and about 670, 690 feet above the airport elevation. So we do need to be aware of those. We also have terrain to the south. That's why you do not want to turn to the left as you make your departure. You got terrain at 1,890 feet. We have quite a bit of high terrain to the north here with terrain elevations of 2670, 2570, 2623. So we wouldn't, well, you can legally make a hard turn to the right once you get up to 400 feet. And with the, as long as you meet the normal climb gradient of 200 feet per nautical mile, you should clear all of that. But that's just something to be aware of. And then you can see we've also got some high terrain out here. The highest terrain, well, I guess it's not the highest terrain. The highest terrain is actually due north out here at 2490 and 2419, and then 2680 over here by Rich Mountain VOR. I also have a few obstacles up here on the mountaintop. So those are just some things to look at and be aware of as you're climbing out. You know, if for some reason you're getting a reduced climb gradient, your airplane is not performing as well, particularly if you were in a multi-engine airplane or were to lose an engine and not have a very good climb gradient. You can see that your safest option here is actually going to be climb straight ahead up to 2,000 and then probably make a left turn towards this lowering terrain over here. The weather in MENA, as it is currently reported, is good enough that we could get back in on the ILS to 27 that we used in the last video, and we'll assume that we feel comfortable departing. Before we talk about the weather in Addison, let's take a look at the arrival chart here. Again, we're going to be flying the slant 3 arrival into Addison, Texas. It serves all of these airports down here McKinney, Addison, Dallas Executive, Midway, down in Waxahachie, Ennis, Lancaster, Mesquite, and Rockwall. So all of these airports are served by this arrival. We're going to be flying out to Camel intersection. You can see on the first couple of segments, again, we're just going to navigate using the GPS direct to Camel. And actually what I'll probably do is once we get airborne and talking to me simulating Memphis Center, I will assume that we get clearance probably direct to Rubber, which will cut down on the time. We'll go direct to that intersection, and then we'll fly the rest of the arrival on into Addison from there. You can see that it does have an MEA of 10,000 feet, but it has a minimum obstacle clearance of 3,700 feet here, 2,500 feet here, 2,000 feet here, 22 and 21. So at 6,000, we will be clear of that obstacle clearance altitude, minimum obstacle clearance altitude, or MOCA, but we will be below the MEA. Again, the MEA is going to give you signal reception along the entire route, and it will give you, guarantees you air traffic control communications reception as well. I don't know why they put MEA so high on GPS arrivals. It's not like you're not going to be able to receive the GPS even if you are on the ground along this route somewhere. So I'm not sure why they put that up so high, but we will be above the obstacle clearance, minimum obstacle clearance altitude, so we won't hit anything, and we should be high enough that we would be able to get radar contact and radio contact in that area as well. So 6,000 altitude, 6,000 feet should be a good altitude for us. So we just track from Camel to Rubber to Chicken to Venue to Repay and then to Cuban, and then that joins the main portion of Arrival where we go to Finger intersection and then to Slant, and then it has us fly a 230 track after that. And there's actually a feeder route onto the approach that picks up at Finger, so we will probably plan to load that in the GPS and fly it from Finger, but normally you would fly it down to Slant, fly the terminal or fly the track, assigned track after that, and then you would get radar vectors onto the approach from there. It does have some notes down here about the arrival. It says that radar is required. We will assume that we have that. You need an RNAV1 type system, and both the Garmin G1000 and the GNS 530 and 430 WASP versions do qualify as that. It says you need DME, IRU, or GPS. This is an older system that you'd find on aircraft like the MD-80, but we obviously have GPS. And then there's a note about coming in from the Oklahoma City terminal area. That does not apply to us. We are not an Oak City departure, so it does not apply to us. It has vertical planning information. It says that you should expect to cross Finger intersection at 8,000 if you're a turbojet. Obviously, we are not. And if you're a prop, you should expect to cross Finger intersection at 6,000 or 7,000 feet. This will not be a issue for us since we will be already at 6,000 feet, but it should load that altitude when we load. Actually, it's an expect altitude, so it won't load that in there. So if we were at a higher altitude and they were to give us this assignment and we wanted to use VNAV to get down there in time and know when to descend, we would want to load that up in the GPS, and we'll talk about a little bit about how to do that. The current ATIS down in Addison is reporting calm winds, 1 statute mile visibility, ceiling overcast 300, temperature 2.23 with an altimeter of 2992. Currently, they're advertising that the ILS and RNAV GPS approach to runway 16 are in use, and the forecast is for it to remain the same at Addison for the next few hours. Of course, the weather reports and forecast at Addison indicate that the weather will be well below the 2,000-foot ceiling and 3-mile visibility required by the 123 rule that would allow us to not file an alternate, so we do need to file an alternate. Of course, there are lots of options here in the DFW metro area. You just have to be careful if you select an alternate that's in the same metro area, particularly the weather is low. Chances are the weather may be about the same at those stations. So I'm going to look outside the metro area just a little bit. And one that catches my eye is over here in Greenville, Texas. Majors Airport here, GVT, or Golf Victor Tango is the identifier. A towered field. When I click on the airport there and bring up the approaches, I see they have 2 ILSs. They're actually the same ILS to the same runway, but they're 2 different versions of that ILS. 2 RNAV approaches, TACANs that we can't use, and a VOR approach. So a lot of different approaches. And they do have an ILS, which allows us to use the precision instrument, or the precision alternate minimums of 600-foot ceiling and a 2-mile visibility. It's also fairly close to the arrival, so if we get held up and holding on the arrival for some reason, it's a little quicker to get over there. So I'm going to pull up the approach plate for the ILS. It says that I can use it as an alternate, but it has non-standard alternate minimums. So I pull up the alternate information for this airport, and it has two notes on this. First, it says none of these approaches are available as alternates when the local weather is not available. We will assume that local weather is available. And then note number 1 for both ILSs says not available when the tower is closed, but when we're planning to arrive, the tower will be open. And then note number 2 is for the localizer approach for category D and E minimums. We are not planning to utilize the localizer approach as an alternate. We are using the ILS. So we can use this as an alternate. We can use the standard alternate minimums of 600 feet and 2 miles. And as luck would have it, that's what the forecast says it's going to be over there at our time of arrival if we had to divert. Just remember that if you file an alternate as an file an airport as an alternate, that doesn't mean that you have to utilize that airport as an alternate. If you end up having to divert, you can choose to go wherever you'd like, as long as you have enough fuel to land there with your IFR reserves. So if we got into the metro area and the weather looked decent at Love, but Addison is sacked in, then we could go ahead and divert to Love or Redbird, which is executive now, or Mesquite or Arlington or any of those other airports. We just need to file something. Basically, they want us to file an alternate so that we have some extra fuel in case we do need to go somewhere else. All right, the last thing we need to do before we hop in the sim is take a look at our fuel, see how much we need, and make sure that we have enough on board. So for start, taxi, takeoff, and climb, we need 3.3 gallons of gas, and we're going to cover a distance of 10 nautical miles in the climb. And we get that from the Cessna 172 manual, section 5, performance. It's the time, fuel, and distance to climb chart. At max gross weight, which will actually be under that, so we'll probably burn a little less than we're calculating. We're going to be climbing from 1,000 feet to 6,000 feet, which is a climb distance of 5,000 feet. And that will take us 8 minutes to do that. It will take us 1.9 gallons of gas, and we'll cover 10 nautical miles, which we have in the chart already. And then it also says we add 1.4 gallons of fuel for engine start, taxi, and takeoff. So we add 1.9 and 1.4, we come up with 3.3 gallons that we're going to burn for taxi, takeoff, and climb. Then from the top of climb to Addison, it was 179 nautical miles from Mena to Addison on the route we're flying. It is going to be minus 10 nautical miles from the top of climb, so 169 miles. We're going to be doing 115 knots of true airspeed. We have 0 wind, so that will also be our ground speed. That's going to take an hour and 29 minutes, and you multiply an hour and 29 times our 12-gallon-hour fuel burn, which again is a little bit of an overestimate. And it says that we're going to burn 18 gallons of gas to get from the top of climb to Addison Airport. Then we need to know how much gas we need to get from Addison to our alternate of Greenville, Texas. That is 40 nautical miles. It will take us 21 minutes of time to fly that, and in that 21 minutes, we'll burn 4.2 gallons of gas. The FAA also says we need 45 minutes of reserve fuel, and at the 12 gallons an hour, that's going to be 9 gallons of gas that we need for our IFR reserve fuel. The total fuel required when we add that up is 34.5 gallons. We went ahead and topped off the tanks in Mena, so we have 53 gallons on board. And so that means if we take 34.5 from 53 gallons, we have 18.5 gallons of spare gas that we can use for delay, holding, or contingency fuel. So that means we have about an hour and a half of extra flying, or about 172 nautical miles of range that we can use for any sort of contingency. All right, so we'll go ahead and jump in the simulator and get things set up for the flight. So we are in the world map, and we will start at the top left, move our way across the top, and then go down to the bottom and set things up there. So first we'll start with aircraft selection. So click on that, aircraft selection. We do want the Textron Aviation Cessna 172 Skyhawk G1000. You will not see the Arista Blue unless you have this particular third-party livery installed. Liveries, it doesn't matter what you do there. Weight and balance, I'm going to set it up with two 170-pound occupants in the front seats and then 100% fuel, 28 gallons in each tank. We went ahead and topped off the fuel there in MENA. We do not need any failures, and customization, you can do what you would like to do there. Going back to the map, we'll go to the from field here, and we'll type in Kilo Mike Echo Zulu. That is MENA Intermountain Airport in MENA, Arkansas. And I'll click on that, and then we can start either on runway 27 or on the ramp. I'm going to go ahead and start on the ramp, but you can start on the runway if you would like to. Just depends on how realistic you'd like to make it and how deep you want your immersion to be. We will not select a 2 field. Flight conditions will go up here, and we will set it to a mid-June day. We will set the time in the bottom left-hand side of the world map. That seems to be more accurate when you do it that way. And then we'll set the weather up in the sim session itself. So we'll close out of that, and then we will set our time down here. We're going to set it to 2:15. We landed at about 1:45, so about a 30-minute turnaround to go into the FBO, get an updated weather briefing, and just relax a little bit is pretty realistic. So we'll plan on getting back out to the aircraft about 2:15, and that should put us getting back into Addison around 4 p.m. or so. That's going to be 19:15 on our Zulu clock. There it is, 7:15 p.m. UTC, and getting back in there about what 2100 Z, I believe. So that's our time, and then we'll go ahead and hop into the simulator and get the weather set up. All right, so we'll go ahead and load up the weather for this flight. We're going to load it up pretty much exactly like it was when we came in for the ILS approach out here. So we're going to set our altitude calculation to AMSL, above mean sea level. We won't do anything with these top 2 layers of clouds. On the bottom layer of clouds, we'll go in and we'll set the coverage to overcast, 100%. Density at 0.5. That should give us about 1.5 miles of visibility. Scatter, doesn't matter what you do with that. I have it set to 0, but at overcast, it really doesn't matter what you do. I've got the top set at 5,500. That should have us breaking out around 4,000 to 4,500. And then the bottoms I have set to 500. The minimums on the approach are around 1,500 coming in. You set it 1,000 feet below that, and that'll give you a pretty good realistic entry into the cloud ceiling, about for 300 to 400 feet above the airport. Whatever the minimums are on the ILS, you'll go in about there. Everything else, precipitation, you could set up some precipitation for departure. I would recommend taking it out for your arrival because it will drop your visibility. So if you want to get in, you don't want to do that. But if you want to put it in for ambiance on departure, you can do that. Snow depth, you don't need any of that since the temperature is so high, unless you want to be unrealistic. Lightning, we will not put any of that in there. Temperature we have set at 75 degrees Fahrenheit. That's about 23 degrees Celsius. And the pressure we have set standard at 2992. And then we have the humidity at 1, which is its lowest setting. If you bump that up, it's going to affect your performance, and it's also going to affect the visibility. So I do recommend leaving it at 1, even though it's obviously a moist day out there. So that is the weather setup. Now we'll go ahead and hop in the airplane, get it started up, let the avionics boot up, and we'll get the avionics set for departure. All right, so we've jumped to the airplane, we've got it started, and we have the avionics booted up. So now we'll go ahead and set up the avionics for the flight. Really, there's not much more to set up than the GPS on a GPS-only leg. I did set up some things on the autopilot. I've got 6,000 in our altitude pre-select. That's our cruise altitude, and I anticipate that will be our initial altitude that we're cleared to when we get our IFR clearance. I've also got the heading selector set up to 269, which is runway heading for runway 27. I also have bearing pointer 1 and 2 up in case I want to tune in any nav aids and see what the distance is on those. And I do have Cowboy VME in the active, which is the closest VOR over to Addison Airport, so I can get some idea of how far away I am from Addison just by glancing at that. Everything else is pretty much setting up the GPS, so we'll go ahead and zoom over here to the GPS. So to set up our flight plan, what I'm going to do is hit the flight plan key. That brings me up to the flight plan page. To set up a full flight plan, I'm going to hit the center of the small button here to get my cursor active, and then I'm going to roll it with the big knob down to the blank line under origin. Then I will twist the small knob to get that field to where I can input information. I'll press the little keyboard thing that Working Title has provided us here with so I can type. We are departing from Mina, which is Kilo Mike Echo Zulu, and that says Mina Intermountain Municipal. That is the one I want. So I will hit enter and enter a second time to accept. You can set up a runway, but the only reason you really need to do that is if you are using a runway dependent departure. We don't have any departures out of here as far as departures that are available in the GPS. We don't need to put anything in the en route field. We don't have any airways or fixes between us and the start of the arrival. So all we need to do is load up the destination and then the arrival. So I will scroll with a big knob down to the blank field on the destination. I'll scroll the little knob to get the field to where I can put information in it. I'll click on the keyboard again to type, and it's Kilo Alpha Delta Sierra is our destination. Addison Airport in Addison, Texas. I'll hit enter. It says, do you want to load a runway? I'll go ahead and load it because we are going to load an approach, but you could also load this when you load the approach. So 16 is the runway that's in use down there right now. I'll go ahead and hit on enter and then enter again. And that does it for that part of the flight plan. Now I need to load our arrival. So I will go ahead and hit procedures. That selects select approach. I do not want to load the approach yet. Usually you load that when you get the ATIS or when you get your approach assigned to you. I'm going to go ahead and scroll it down to select arrival, and I will hit enter. And then that brings up all of the arrivals, and I'm going to use the big knob to scroll down to the slant 3 is what we want. I will hit enter. Then we need to choose where to start the slant 3. So I will scroll down to camel. That's where we want to start it. And I will hit enter. You'll notice it gives you all of the fixes, and it also gives you a visual depiction of the arrival here. So it goes camel, rubber, chicken, venue, repay, Cuban. And then we'll scroll down to see the rest of them. Finger, slant, and then manual sequence, which is just flying that track of 230 after you get to the slant intersection. So all that is correct. And then Addison Airport. So we'll go ahead and scroll down to load, hit enter, and now it's all loaded in there. And I can hit the cursor again, hit the middle of the small knob, and I can actually go through and look at all the fixes here. We do not have any altitude set in here. We'll probably put one in there later. We'll assume that we get a clearance to cross finger at a certain altitude once we get down there. But for now, we don't need any of that in there. So we'll go ahead and turn the cursor off. I'll reset the flight plan here. Actually, I guess I have to scroll back up to have it at the very beginning. So we'll put it up there and then turn the cursor off. And that is it. Everything is set up to go on the GPS. The flight plan is loaded in there. One other thing you can do is on the range map, you can zoom in and out, and you can see your route on there as well. You can see the active leg to camel, and then we take the left turn and head down there. And again, once we get airborne, we're going to hope that we get direct to rubber and can shave off a little bit of mileage and time. All right, so that's it for loading the avionics. Now we'll go ahead and give Memphis Center a call and get our IFR clearance. So the only real way to get a clearance on the ground in Mina is to call Memphis Center on a phone number. They do not have a remote communication outlet down here. So we'll assume that we have our cell phone, we got the number, and we'll go ahead and give them a call. And they pick up the phone, and we say, this is Cessna 172 Golf Hotel on the ground at Mina, looking to pick up IFR clearance to Addison. They say Cessna 172 cleared to Addison Airport as filed. Enter controlled airspace heading 269. Climb and maintain 6,000 feet. Departure frequency is with Memphis Center on 126.1, squawk 5502. We read all that back to them. They say it is correct, and then they ask, do we want a clearance void time, or do we want to call them at the end of the runway? We'll say that we'll call you back at the end of the runway and get an IFR release. So they say hold for release, and we will taxi out and then give them a call at the end of the runway. After getting our clearance, we'll taxi out and accomplish our run-up. We'll then taxi to and hold short of runway 27. Then we'll give Memphis Center a call for our IFR release. We'll assume that we get our IFR release and a clearance void time. We'll then accomplish our before takeoff checklist, make our traffic calls on the common traffic advisory frequency, and perform a normal takeoff from runway 27. All right, so we're climbing through 2,200 feet, just coming out of traffic pattern altitude. We have the autopilot on in heading select mode and flight level change, climbing at best rate, and we have the after takeoff checklist complete, so we'll go ahead and check in with the Memphis Center on 126.1. We call up and we say Cessna 172 Golf Hotel is with you, 2,500, climbing 6,000. They call back and they say Cessna 172 Golf Hotel, radar contact, climb and maintain 2,600. When able, proceed direct to Camel and resume on navigation. We read all of that back, and since we've been given the direct to Camel, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my heading bug over here to the head of the needle, and that'll get us kind of pointed that direction. And then I'm going to go direct, so I'll hit the direct key. It brings up Camel, which is what I want. I'll hit enter. It says, do you want to activate that? I say yes. You'll notice the CDI tunes over there. And looks like we are on course. You've shifted the course on there direct from our present position. So we'll go ahead and engage nav. We have GPS tracking engaged, and so we are on our way to Camel. So we'll go ahead and climb up to 6,000 feet. We'll level off and cruise the airplane out, leaning the mixture above 3,000 feet as necessary. And with the GPS leg, it's pretty simple. You just follow the magenta line, keep the airplane on the CDI, make sure it doesn't do anything funny, and it will take you all the way to your destination. And as we climb up through about 4,400 feet or so, we're getting on top of the clouds. So it looks like we'll have a nice ride on top here, where I also got handed off to Memphis Center on 119.25, so we checked in with them. Cessna 172 Golf Hotel is with you climbing through 4,600 for 6,000. He calls back and says Cessna's 172 Hotel, roger. We get a little bit of a wild hair and we say, you know what, maybe since we're above all of the obstructions in this area, he'd let us take a shortcut over to Rubber. So we call up and we say, Cessna 172 Golf Hotel, any chance direct to Rubber to get on the arrival there? He says, Cessna 172 Golf Hotel, that's approved as requested. Proceed direct Rubber and resume the slant 3 arrival. So we've been cleared direct to Rubber intersection. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull my flight plan up with the flight plan key. That brings up all the fixes. I'm going to scroll with the big knob down to Rubber, and then I will hit the direct key. It says, Rubber, do you want to go direct there? I say yes by saying enter. And then it says, do you want to activate this? And I say yes again. And you can see over here it's turned direct to Rubber. The CDI has changed direct to Rubber. And we are on our way, and that's cut just a little bit of time off of our time and distance off our originally filed flight plan. This is pretty common to use in real life. If you have to file a certain way just because it's procedure to file that way, once you get airborne, usually you can get something a little more direct. Sometimes it doesn't work out due to traffic or other air traffic control constraints, but it never hurts to ask. All right, so we are leveled off at 6,000 feet. We've done our cruise checklist. We've leaned the mixture, and the airplane is all cruised out. And looking on the data fields we have here, I'll zoom it in here just a little bit. I've got distance to go, which is distance to destination. So currently that is 135 nautical miles, showing an hour and 10 en route. And so all we need to do is just make sure that the airplane follows the appropriate route. And once we get within range of Addison, we'll pick up the ATIS and we will get ready for the approach. Otherwise, it looks like a nice smooth ride on top. We'll just sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride. So we made the turn at Rubber and turned onto the arrival, so we are established on the arrival. We've been handed off to Fort Worth Center. We've been handed off to a couple different sectors of Fort Worth Center. We're now on 124.875. We're about to cross out from underneath the MOA. Again, that's up at 8,000 feet, the floor, so we are underneath that. And we're getting up on 75 miles here, so we'll start checking to see if the Addis is coming through and pick up the Addis and see what the weather is doing down there in Addison and what runways are in use. And then I imagine probably in about 25 miles we'll be handed off to Fort Worth approach and start to prepare for the instrument approach there in Addison. I also wanted to point out kind of a funny thing about the intersections on some of these arrivals and some approaches. You notice the fix right here that we navigated direct to was rubber, and the next one is chicken, so rubber chicken. And it's a good idea to keep your eye out for things like this. I think there's a approach up in Portsmouth, New Hampshire that has I think that's a nautical themed reference. There's one in Kansas City that has spicy barbecue sauce. A lot of the arrivals in and out of Atlanta are themed. They have a Lord of the Rings themed arrival and a Star Wars themed arrival. In fact, I think it's the good guys in Star Wars, the Jedi versus the Sith. Two different arrivals. One's good and one's bad. Same thing with the Lord of the Rings, where it's one is all the heroes and the other one is all the villains in that series. So, when you're cruising along and you don't have anything else to do, it's kind of fun to look at those and see what all they've named their fixes and things like that to see if it has a theme to it. So when we get close enough to Addison that we can pick up the Addis, we'll go ahead and do that. They're currently advertising information echo. Currently the weather is the same as when we departed. It is calm winds, 1 statute mile visibility, overcast, ceiling of 300. So actually the ceiling has dropped down, oddly enough, to our minimums for that GPS approach. Temperature 23, dew point 23, altimeter 2992. They have flipped the field around from when we departed, and they are now advertising the ILS and the RNAV GPS approach to runway 16 is in use. And once we check in with approach, we will request that RNAV GPS. Let's go ahead and take a look at the approach, and we'll do a briefing on that. Okay, so pulling up the approach plate and looking at that, we have the RNAV GPS to runway 16 in Addison. Identifier is Alpha Delta Sierra. It is in the Dallas, Texas metro area, so that's where all of the information for that for this particular airport will be located. It gives us the WASH channel up here. There's nothing we can really do with that. Just lets us know that we can use WAS on this approach, and both the G1000 and the Garmin 530 and 430 are WAS capable, so we can use the LPV minimums. The approach course is 157, and that is duplicated here on the plan view. It tells us the runway landing length is 6224, the touchdown zone elevation is 644, and the airport elevation is 645. We have the right approach to the right airport. We verified all that. It says it's an RNP approach GPS, and we do have an RNP equipped GPS in the G1000 and the Garmin GNS 530 and 430. The T tells us that it has non-standard takeoff minimums, obstacle departure notes, or an obstacle departure procedure. We looked at that when we departed out of here, but it's not applicable to us as an arrival. And the A means it has non-standard alternate minimums. So for filing the airport as an alternate, which is not applicable to us, we're not using the airport as an alternate. It says that runway 16 helicopter visibility has a note about that we're not a helicopter, so we don't have to worry about that. For uncompensated Baro VNAV systems, we do not have an uncompensated Baro VNAV system. Both the G1000 and the GNS 530 and 430W are Baro compensated systems. Well, they're WAS systems, so they don't need to be Baro compensated. For in-op approach lighting system, the approach lighting is working, so that is not applicable to us. It says the in-op table does not apply. So that's all the notes, and none of them apply to us. It shows us that it has a Mauser type approach lighting system, and it depicts what that looks like down there, and that's the code for it, which it will list later. It Tells us that the missed approach procedure is to climb straight ahead to 3000 direct to Vayex, I think, and on a track 7076 to Tris and hold. And you can see that's depicted here. So you go straight ahead to Vayex, and then you make a turn to the left and go out to Tris intersection and hold out there with a direct entry. It has all of the frequencies in the order that we're going to need them. The ATIS we've already gotten. The approach control is 1243. Tower is 1260. The L means the approach line or the airfield lining can be pilot controlled when the tower is closed. The star means it is part-time. It will close at some point, but at the time in the afternoon we're arriving, it will still be open. It has ground control, clearance delivery if you need that on the way back out, and then it has a Unicom frequency if you need to use that for getting fuel. Looking at the plan view, we have a couple of bodies of water that are depicted out here. We have obstacles that are depicted out here, and they tell us what the height of our altimeter would read if we were to hit the top of that obstacle. You can see there's numerous ones close to the field. Most are underneath our decision altitude on the approach, and then the tallest one is over here, 1548 on the feeder route from Finger and Manos. But the altitude over here is 3,000 feet, so that is not a problem. We do have a feeder route, and we are going to utilize that feeder route from Finger, which is the next to last intersection on the approach. It goes from Finger over to Manos, and it's at 3,000 feet. So if we've been cleared for the approach, at that point we can go down to 3,000 feet, a course of 229 and 14.4 miles. And then it leads to Manos, and from Manos you go up to Sornay, and that's at 3,000 feet, course of 282 and 13.6 miles on that. Once you get to Sornay, you're on the approach proper, and once you hit Sornay and have been cleared for the approach, you can go down to 2,100 feet. The course there is 247, and the distance on this leg is 5 nautical miles. It is an initial approach fix, so you could navigate directly to that fix if you wanted to, but again, we're going to take that feeder out from Finger. Assume that ATC clears us that way. We do have another approach fix up here of Auric, but we are not going to utilize that one. Once we get to Banu, that is the intermediate fix. At that point, we can descend down to 2,000. It's a course of 157, the same as the final approach course, and it's 6.8 miles from Banu down to Jarrett. We'll plan to descend down to 2,000, then about 3 miles from Jarrett, we will configure for the approach. Jarrett is the final approach fix. That is where we will intercept the glide path, and then we will ride it on down and into the runway, and then it has the missed approach depicted down here. It does have a minimum safe altitude if you're within 25 nautical miles of runway 16, the 16 GPS waypoint. 3,600 feet will keep you safe, but remember this is an emergency altitude. If it's an MSA, this is not a sector altitude like you have on other GPS approaches. So we would need clearance to go down to that altitude. It's not something we can just go down to. Looking at the profile view down here, it has a note up here that the visual glide slope and the RNAV glide path are not the same, so they are slightly different. The visual glide slope angle is 3 degrees, and the threshold crossing height, where you're going to cross the threshold if you're on the electronic glide slope, is 60 feet. Again, it shows Banu, the intermediate fix out here at 2,100 feet. And then once we cross Banu, we can go down to 2,000 feet, and that's what we'll do. We'll descend down to 2,000 feet, and then about 3 miles from Jarrett, we'll go ahead and configure and get on our approach speed, and then we'll intercept the glide path and ride it down from there. It says we intercept the glide path at 2,000 feet. That will be our final approach fix. It gives us the distances on each of the legs, 6.8 miles from Banu to Jarrett, and 4.1 miles from Jarrett to runway 16, which is the missed approach point if we were flying this as an LNAV approach, but we are not. We're flying it as an LPV approach, which gives us a glide path. So our missed approach point is going to be the decision altitude. That's where we will make the decision as to whether or not to miss the approach. It has the categories for the approach. We are category A aircraft, but the minimums are same for A, B, C, and D. It does not have minimums for category E aircraft. And it tells us that the LPV decision altitude, we are going to shoot the LPV approach, is 944 feet on our altimeter. When we reach that altitude, we'll need to take a look and decide whether or not we can go ahead and descend to a landing or whether we need to execute the missed approach. Visibility required for the approach is one statute mile. The 944 feet is 300 feet above the touchdown zone elevation. And then, of course, the parentheses are for military. And then we are not going to use the LNAV VNAV approach, and we're not going to use the LNAV approach, and we are not circling, so none of these bottom minimums apply to us. Looking at the airport diagram, it reiterates that the airport is at 645 feet. Touchdown zone elevation for runway 16 is 644 feet. It shows us the displaced threshold, which is why we have 7,200 feet of concrete, but only 6,200 feet of landing distance available. We'll need to make sure and land beyond that. It depicts the approach lights and tells us that it is a Mauser type system. Depicts the PAPI on the right-hand side here, shows us where the beacon is, and shows us the displaced threshold on the other side here. And the PAPI for runway 34 gives us the runway widths and lengths and has the taxiways and ramps diagrammed out there for us. So let's take a look at how we're going to shoot this approach. All right, so how we're going to shoot this approach is we'll arm nav once we are on, or we will activate nav. In fact, we'll probably have nav on the entire time as we're flying towards the approach, flying the feeder route, all that sort of stuff. Once we have crossed Banu, we'll go ahead and descend from 2,100 feet down to 2,000 feet and level off there. That shouldn't take us more than that should take probably less than a mile to do that. Once we're level at 2,000 and we get 3 miles from the glide path intercept, which will be 3 miles from Jarrett Waypoint, then we'll go ahead and configure. So we'll bring our power to 1,800 RPM. Once we're below 110 knots, which we should be already, we'll bring the flaps to 10. We'll hold altitude and allow the aircraft to slow. Once we're below 85 knots, we'll bring the flaps to 30, 1 notch at a time. And then about 75 knots, we'll push the power back in to around 2,200 to 2,400 RPM to maintain level flight at 70 knots at 2,000 feet. Once we're stabilized in level flight at 70 knots, our approach speed, we'll go ahead and accomplish that before landing checklist. And we will do what we want to do with the autopilot and flight director. I'm going to go ahead and fly this with the autopilot and the flight director engaged, so I will have those on the whole time, but you could turn the autopilot off and fly it with just the flight director, or you can turn both of them off and try to fly it on raw data if you'd prefer to do that. At this point, we also want to arm the approach mode so that we get the glide path tracking with either the autopilot or the flight director. Once that glide path comes down and we intercept it and start flying it, we want to go ahead and reduce engine power down to 1,800 to 2,000 RPM to begin our descent. And then we want to track the GPS lateral guidance and glide path to the decision altitude. And once we reach the decision altitude, we either want to transition to a visual landing once the required visual cues are in sight, or if we get to the decision altitude and we don't have any visual cues in sight, then we want to go ahead and execute the missed approach procedure, or we can execute the missed approach procedure anytime prior to that it becomes appropriate to do so. So about 7 miles from Finger, we get handed off to Fort Worth Center, 124.3. We check on with them and we say Cessna 172 Golf Hotel is with you. Have information Echo at Addison, and we're looking to fly the RNAV GPS runway 16 from the Finger feeder route. He says, Roger, Cessna 172 Golf Hotel, you can expect that, maintain 6,000. All right, so since we are now expecting that approach, we will go ahead and zoom into the multifunction display here. We'll hit procedure and we'll go ahead and select our approach. And then we'll do 16. We want the RNAV GPS LPV 16, or RNAV GPS 16 LPV. There it is, and we can see the route in here. So we'll hit enter there. It says, where do you want to start the approach? We would like to start it at Finger, so we go Finger, Manos, Sorne, Banu, and on in on the approach from there. Yes, we would like to do that. Minimums, we could go ahead and load those up here. So the minimums are going to be 944, So we'll go ahead and bring those in here. We may have to load those again, I guess we'll see. And actually it won't do 944, so we'll have to do 950, so we'll round up. So there's 950, and then we'll hit enter. We can go through the waypoints here. Everything looks good. And then it asks, do you want to load or you want to activate? If you load, it will send you, it will put it at the end of your current flight plan. If you activate, it will send you directly to that fix. So I'm going to go ahead and load. And we can see here, we're about, let's back up here. 3.5 miles from Finger. I'm going to make sure that we've got the intersections correct. It still has Finger, slant, and manual sequence. So what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of slant. So we will go clear, remove it, yes. Then we'll go to manual sequence, clear, remove it, yes. And so now we're going from Finger direct to Manos. So we are good there. All right, so that's all loaded up, and now we'll just watch it fly around, and we'll wait for our clearance for the approach. We'll pretend like approach throws us a little curveball here. He says, Cessna 172 Golf Hotel, present position, proceed direct to Sornay intersection. Maintain 3,000 or cross Sornay at or above 3,000, and you're cleared for the RNAV GPS to runway 16. So let's see here. First, we need to go direct to Sornay. So what I'm going to do is pull up the flight plan, activate the cursor, scroll down to Sornay, and I'm going to go direct. It says Sornay. I say enter, yes, activate, yes, and we are going now direct to Sornay. That's going to take us just to the north of, what's that, McKinney, I believe that is. And that'll probably be actually better for their traffic. We won't be, we'd be basically passing directly overhead rather than getting in one of their finals. At least we'll get on the final kind of well over where the traffic is going to be. The traffic will be quite a bit lower. Their Class D starts at 2,900 feet and then goes down from there, so we should be on top of all of their traffic. He also said cross Sornay at or above 3,000, so I'm going to go to the flight plan here. It already has 3,000 preloaded in here, so we'll back up so we can see all of our screens here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select 3,000 in here. And you can see the FMS will also stop us at 3,000, and you can see the TOD right here. That's top of descent, so that tells us this is where you're going to start your descent for 3,000 to cross Sornay at 3,000, and that looks good to me. So I'll go ahead and arm the VNAV, and it says VPath is armed. So when we get a little bit closer to that fix, this is a 10-mile circle. So when we get probably 5 to 3 miles away, we'll start seeing the glide path come down, and then when it centers up, it will catch it. We need to remember to pull our power back so we don't overspeed on the way down, and then it will make us cross Sornay right there, right level at 3,000 feet. A few other little chores that we need to do. It does look like our baro bug is set there, so that looks good. I'll double check on that. Yep, there it is. Baro is 950 feet. The other thing I'm going to do is I am going to set the best glide speed to my approach speed, so I have a reference bug for that. I will leave that on. I'm going to turn off VR because I won't need that anymore, and that way we'll have good speed references for our approach. So now we'll just wait for our glide path to center up, and we'll fly on around, and once we hit Sornay at 3,000, we'll go ahead and descend down to 2,100 feet, and once we hit Banu, we'll go ahead and go down to 2,000 feet. And we see it right about 5 miles or just inside of 5 miles from the top of descent is when the glide path started displaying. It is still up on the top of the scale right now. It hasn't started to come down just yet, but it should start to come down here in just a minute or so. And you can see just right before we hit the top of descent, that little caret came down to indicate that the glide path is coming in. So we are starting to descend down towards 3,000 feet. Also has a caret for the target vertical rate of descent there that it will try to match. And then we will just pull the power back to stay at about 105 knots. Descend on down to 3,000. And then when we hit Sorne, we can go down to 2,100 feet. At that point, I'll probably put it back into vertical speed mode. And then once we get to Banu, we'll go on down to 2,000 and then configure for the approach. And one last little simulator chore that we need to take care of before we start the approach is setting the weather so that we break out about at minimums. So we'll go in here and we'll go to the lowest cloud layer and we'll just reset the bottoms to -49. It's best to go in there and type that in. And the way I get that is take our decision altitude, round it up to the next 10, and then subtract about 1,000 feet. So our decision altitude is 944, round up to the nearest 10, that's 950 minus 1,000, you come up with -50 feet. So that should have us breaking out at 300 feet or just a little bit above. All right, so there's Sorne at 2,100 feet, or excuse me, at 3,000 feet. We'll go ahead and reset the altitude down to 2,100. I'm going to do that in a vertical speed descent, about 500 feet per minute. We didn't bring the power all the way back in because it was time to descend pretty much immediately after we got down to 3,000 feet. So we'll descend down to 2,100 feet, level off. Down there, I'm just going to do it a vertical speed descent to go down there. Otherwise, it's going to wait until we're pretty close to Banu to start its descent. And so then we will be turning on to the final, or turning on to the intermediate and the final approach course there. And it'll be time to get ready to go down to that last step down fix, or that last platform altitude, and then we will configure for the approach. All right, so here comes the turn at Banu. I'll wait for it to flip over to the next fix. Looks like we're leveling at 2,100 feet. When the next leg turns magenta, there it goes. I'll go ahead and roll this down to 2,000 feet. I'll go ahead and descend down in a very gentle descent down to 2,000 feet. And then we'll wait for 3 miles from Jarrett, and we will configure for the approach. Okay, so we're under 4 nautical miles now, 3.7 nautical miles. Approach call is up and says you can contact the tower 126.0. We'll go ahead and flip over to them. We'll say Cessna 172 Golf Hotel is about 3 miles from Jarrett on the RNAV GPS runway 16. They say Cessna 172 Golf Hotel. Visibility is 1 mile. Runway 16. You are cleared to land. There's 3 nautical miles, so we'll go ahead and pull our power back to 1,800 feet, or 1,800 RPMs. There's 1,800. We're slowing down. We're below 110, so we'll put that first notch of flaps out. Waiting for 85. And we'll bring the second notch in. There's 85, there's that second notch. And then the third notch. 75, we'll go ahead and push the power back up to about 2,200 RPMs or so. We'll go ahead and arm the approach. You can see the glide path is coming down. The autopilot should follow that. We've got our before landing checklist complete. And then it's just making sure that we stay on path and on the glide, or excuse me, on the glide path and on the lateral guidance, and it should take us to the runway. All right, so glide path is capturing. So all I have to do now is adjust the power to stay on speed. Should be around 2,000, maybe 1,900 RPMs. Looks like 2,000 is working pretty well right now. And we just ride this glide path down, basically 1,000 feet to our decision altitude, and see if we can see anything when we get there. A little too much on the power, so I'm going to back it off to about 1,900 and see if that gets us back on speed. I'll go ahead and set my altitude for the missed approach. It says missed approach climb to 3,000, so we'll scroll that up there. Still a little bit fast, so I'm going to pull it back to maybe 1,850. See if that does the trick. Looks like about 1,850 or so is going to hold. our speed. Well, there's 500 minimums right there. About 1040, we'll take a look up and see if we have anything in sight. You can see our minimums bug is starting to come off the bottom of the tape there.
500.
It's 500 feet to the ground. All right, there's 102 minimums. And there's the runway. Autopilot's coming off. All we have to do now is transition to a visual landing. So that is how to plan and fly a cross-country using just an IFR cross-country using just GPS navigation. That concludes this video and concludes our IFR cross-country training series. Hopefully this video has increased your understanding of how to plan and execute an IFR cross-country flight and shown you how you can effectively use GPS navigation to fly the departure, en route, arrival, and approach phases of flight. And I hope the entire series has shown you how to effectively plan and fly an IFR cross-country flight using any navigation system you choose. Again, if you've enjoyed the content, don't forget to like the video, share with your friends, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell to be alerted to new content. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.